Hello and welcome to the Golf Pro Show. My name is Gary Shaw and with me as always is Liam Grehan. I am calling from London here. It's been a while since the last episode, almost a year, but we won't say too much about that. But it has been a very busy 10 months. I've left the EU. I'm now in London and Liam is still knocking around the K Club and around Dublin and Ireland. But Liam has also been very busy out on the fairways. So you wanna...
Yeah, I had a hectic year, Gary. I was Spain, January, February, then South Africa in April for Sunshine Tour. Unfortunately missed by one there, and then played Clutch Pro Tour for the summer. So we will have another episode where we'll get into life as a golf pro and moving country and playing on the mini tours. So that'll be in the future shortly. But today we were joined by Dylan Beirne. He was a K Club member for a little while, and I got to know him over the last few years. He's at the really top of his game in golf stats in the industry. He's recently come back from working with the international team in the President's Cup. So we got some great insights from Dylan, chatting to Adam Scott, who else? Mike Weir, like Ben Ann, Sean Foley, Jeff Ogilvie. So it's a really interesting chat to hear inside the ropes at a President's Cup, what he has been working on recently with big projects, with stats platforms, and how you can improve your game really from getting these insights. So I think if anyone's a bit of a golf nerd and is trying to improve their game, they'll really enjoy this. And there's some cool stories from inside the ropes in the President's Cup too.
Absolutely, yeah. And people interested in strokes gained and all that side of golf, stats nerds, going to love this. So enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Golf Pro Show. My name is Gary Shaw and with me as usual is Liam Grehan, and we have a very special guest today, Mr. Dylan Beirne. If you want to introduce yourself, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks Gary. Yeah, so I guess I'm probably what you might call a golf data scientist. I've been working in golf data and working with players and teams and stuff for the last, I feel old here, probably like 8-9 years now. So kind of covered a lot of ground with that and seen a lot of different things. Yeah, excited to have a chat about it.
Class, Dylan. I've been picking your brain for a few years now since knowing you in the K Club and all, so I'm looking forward to getting into it a little bit further. I suppose, like, intro wise, I know you didn't start out in the stats industry. I know you started elsewhere and then worked your way into it. How did that come about? And then we'll get into some more recent news and recent adventures in shortly.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping none of my previous employers are listening, but so I actually started off in construction. I did like 3 years in that, and I was kind of fortunate towards the end of it. I was always like really interested in data and kind of writing code and all about sports. So towards the end of it, I got a couple of projects that I was working on that were kind of slow taking off, and they kept getting postponed, and I had a lot of free time. One in particular in an office where I was like sitting there for 6 months. I basically learned some code, wrote some golf models, and then the job actually started and I left, which I'm sure they didn't appreciate, but went to a betting company and I ended up kind of writing some models and some code for them. And from there went to a company called 15 Club in London. And that was kind of how I originally got in with like tour players, and we did the Ryder Cup in 2018, which was a big success, obviously. And then I kind of sort of tapered away from that. I actually left and then stayed on as like a consultant for a while to do the Ryder Cup in 21, which was less of a success, but it was a good experience. And then, yeah, since then I've had a couple of companies, worked with a betting company. We were actually kind of more golf trading. We were basically betting on golf for a couple of years. And then about a year ago, I kind of decided I wanted to bring it all together into my own company. So I've set up Quantum Sports Data and been working on basically building golf models and a lot of other stuff in the last year.
Deadly. So, like, you've obviously had experience working directly with players, working with teams. How does it look, say, like ahead of, say, the President's Cup this time round? How does your prep look coming into that? Because you've obviously worked with the international team in the President's Cup this last year, and they had a pretty good battle against the US, which will be probably the favourites, but the international team did a great job going up against them this year.
Yeah, so I've done the last 3 President's Cups actually. I started in Melbourne. I recently found out that the US team didn't have any stats people in Melbourne, so we really caught them on the hop that time.
That was really close, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were 2 up going into singles. Probably should have got it done. But anyway, look, we didn't. But did that, and it's kind of evolved from there. So, like, I suppose what I did this time was a lot more detailed than what I would have done then. But yeah, leading up, so it basically started straight away afterwards. So I had a call last week with next time's captain, who I won't name. But yeah, so we went through kind of a bit of a post-mortem of this time, planning out the process. So it basically starts like that. To go back to this time's process, we went to Montreal with Mike just over a year ago now and played the course a couple of times to kind of get a feel for it. So that was a good starting point. And from there, we were basically updating them on, what players are playing well, who's likely to make the team, and just general updates on their performance for the year. And then obviously as we get closer, we look at the picks is the initial one. So that's probably 6 weeks out. Pretty much straight away after that, we look at pairings, even though pairings kind of comes into that a little bit, but less so. So we do the proper analysis of pairings pretty much straight away after that. Then we went on a team trip a month before the event. So that was kind of the point where, I sat down with all the players, did a presentation on this is some of the key information on the course, try and give them a couple of bullet points because there was 60 pages in the report on the course, so I was like, they're not going to sit there for 2 hours and listen to me talk about hit it here, don't hit it here. And then, a lot of it is always with new players, you want to kind of give them a sense of what we're doing. So just explaining the kind of concepts of how we come up with pairings, how it works with the captains and, getting them to buy in. And then, yeah, from there, it's there's probably a month in between where we sort of refine the pairings a little bit more. That's a lot of conversations with. So there was obviously Mike was the captain, and there was 5 vice captains this time. So a lot of conversations with them on what players might work well together, what format we like them in, what they like, and it's a lot of over and back and trying to land on a kind of final lineup. But yeah, that's pretty much how it leads into it. Yeah. So there's a good bit goes in. Yeah.
So say with picking the team, how much goes into form versus course fit and what the team needs, say for even do you think when you're picking someone, is it down to foursomes? Is it this person will work well with that, or do you look into just more course fit and then you'll figure out the pairings after?
Yeah, so it's a combination of a few things. Obviously the main factor is just how good is the player. That's the fundamental thing, and that'll be the biggest influence. I'm kind of fortunate in a way because the work that I've done has allowed me to create a lot of different models for different things. One of them being course fit. So obviously I can project Mackenzie Hughes onto Royal Montreal, and I can say, right, Mackenzie Hughes is going to overperform by X amount. So he becomes this type of player. So we do that for each of the players. And then there's a little bit on how we think they'll handle the pressure and the situation. So there's a way of doing that, but it's a bit more subjective. That's definitely something that the captains come into quite strongly. Then, yeah, the pairings is probably the last thing, to be honest. If it's down to, that'll narrow it down to let's say, the 6 picks, 4 of them are pretty much set in stone. There might be 2 spots and there might be 4 players for those 2 spots. And that's kind of when we start to get into who we would pair them with. Okay,
interesting. So say the Kims, for example, that played together, they seemed to be an unbelievable pairing. They were just the clutchest team on the whole President's Cup by the looks of it. Was that clear before you went that they were going to play well together, or is it just that they rose to the occasion and were clutch as hell?
Yeah, Siwoo Kim gives me nightmares because he's an unbelievable player and a really nice fella, but difficult to model. Right. He definitely raises his game in these situations. And Jeff said it to me, Jeff Ogilvy said, in fairness, before Charlotte, he was you're wrong about Siwoo Kim. And I said, this is what the data says. It's not I'm not saying it, I'm just saying this is what he's done historically. And he was he's going to be better. He was he's top quality in these situations. So we're seeing that more, and it's all help and feed, it's good information because I can then use that and I'm all right, there's a bit more to this than I'm seeing. So I'm starting to like try and incorporate that more into models as well. But yeah, the Tom and Siwoo that's a pairing that, like, to be honest, on paper it's fine. It wouldn't be a standout good pairing on paper, but obviously, like, chemistry, when you put them together, it's a good example of like data and captains kind of coming together and saying, look, this works, let's do it.
Unreal. Like
it's like a magic, not magic formula, but there's some formula there of like the data obviously stands clear, but then obviously characters working well together and that kind of stuff. How do you blend the two? Like,
I mean,
the nature
it's a lot of conversations, to be honest. Like a lot of it comes down to captains, and like the captains are great at like getting opinions from other people as well. So like Siwoo's caddy is Manny, who's Camilo Villegas' brother. So like we have a really good insight into, like, Camilo knows what's driving him and where Siwoo is and that type of thing. So there's a lot of that goes on. But yeah, it's really like with pairings, there's definitely tens of millions of combinations you can have in a session lineup. And what I try and do is, like, I'll narrow it down to like sort of the top 1%. But even within that, you've still got millions of combinations. So there's a lot of ways we can line up, and really I nearly need the captains to give me input so we can start narrowing down, to take it from here down to here. And then we might end up with the 500th best lineup on paper, but it actually works, personalities. And like Corey Connors, Mackenzie Hughes this time was a good example where that was a good matchup on paper. I kind of threw it out there, said, look, I like the look of this, and they immediately were like, yeah, great pair, let's go with that. So sometimes it's that easy, other times it's a bit more over and back. But
Class.
Yeah, there's no kind of formula to it. It's just conversations, really.
Like, like Poulter and Monty during the Ryder Cups and all that, where they're just so fucking good. Like, and then on paper they're probably nowhere near good enough. Like, that was kind of a magic formulas that they just work.
Yeah, you get that with some pairings and players, and like, I think that's something that probably going back to like my kind of early days with 15 Club and stuff, was that we were always very much in the mindset of like, data isn't like the answer. It's not like it gives you a prescriptive way of doing things. It's part of the puzzle, and I actually was talking to one of the players about this on the Sunday night. It's like, if we can take data and add like kind of subjective opinions from people who are incredibly experienced at this stuff, and we can blend them together, we can make something that's better than either of them individually.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's the approach we take to it, really.
So say one question I was thinking before this, like in a team event, the strategy I'd imagine changes from like a normal stroke play event. And would you say advise the players like play more aggressively on certain holes, or depending on the state of the match? How does that work? Or do you let the players be the players, that they're pretty good if they make the team in the first place, let them just play, or do you help them in that sense?
Yeah, for the most part, we try and leave them to it as much as possible. The way I try to kind of position myself is like, I'm there and I'm around the team for pretty much the whole week. Like, whenever they're eating and stuff, I'll be there at, table beside them. So they all know I'm there. And like, part of the whole thing of presenting to them like the month before is that they know the facility's there. So whatever they need, they can definitely come and ask the question. Some do. There's a couple of things like, the 7th hole, there was a par 3, there was a couple of areas there that there was useful information on. There was a couple of questions about the 14th, which was kind of a semi-drivable par 4. So there was a few things that I kind of went to them with when it was blatantly obvious, because I thought it might help. I actually would go to the caddies more so than the players. But I try and just make it more of a let them ask the question, and I'm happy to answer it. But I don't like to get too kind of prescriptive with them, because, like you said, like they're 12 of the top 50 players in the world, so they pretty much know what they're doing.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about was like the first session didn't quite go to plan for you, and then you came back unbelievable in the second session. What was the team room like after the first session, and like what was that experience like? I can't imagine it was a comfortable place, and then all of a sudden that evening it was a different world.
You actually wouldn't believe me if I told you. I took a video of it. So we came back. The way it works is like play finishes and you have 45 minutes then to get the pairings in for the next day. So everyone rushes back in. We go into a little room. It was actually the ladies' locker room. We go in there. We sit down with the captains and like, we have a plan. It's like, are we sticking to the plan? Are we making any changes? Whatever. So Thursday, like, all credit to the captains. There wasn't really any discussion about changing the plan. It was like, this is the Friday lineup. We stick with it. Fair enough, it didn't go our way today, but we talked about a couple of things, had a bit of data there, and it was like, right, fine, let's go again. So we go do that, and then we were coming back on the buggies, and the cabin is hopping, like music blaring. The lads were out on the chipping green, like hitting flop shots across the green, everyone laughing, a few beers. Unbelievable. It was like we had just won it.
And it was 5-0 at this stage, wasn't it?
Yeah. We were 5-0 down. Yeah. It was just there's a caddy captain and kind of a group of those lads. He's called Bussy. He does caddies for Adam Scott, but he's a really good like personality to have in the room. And as far as I know, I think he kind of said a few words and just kind of livened up the atmosphere and said, "Look, let's enjoy it. Whatever happens, we're here. Like everyone loves the team. We're here to enjoy it." And by the time we got back, it was unbelievable. And like, from my perspective, there's no way Friday would have happened if we had sat around and kind of moped and been miserable Thursday evening. So yeah, it was unbelievable.
That's incredible. So what, like if the form was that good after the losing 5-0 when they won 5-0 the next day, what was it like? It must have been pretty wild. They figured out their formula for the evenings, have the crack, and
yeah, it actually got, would you believe it was quieter Friday than it was Thursday, because I think everyone was like Thursday it was like, look, we can let our hair down, we can enjoy it. Friday when we swept them, because the cabins are quite close together, there was kind of a sense of like we probably didn't want to like rub it in their face. It's like if you go back a party after winning 5-0, it's like, oh, they think they've already won it. So it was definitely more tame on Friday.
Okay.
It was still like it's always one of the things I love about the President's Cup is like the atmosphere in the team room and the people in the team room was unbelievable. So it was still good, it was still fun, but it was actually quieter Friday than Thursday, believe it or not.
I'd imagine the kind of headspace that the players are in is like, we've a chance again here properly. Like when you lose 5-0, it's probably a bit right. Okay, you can let it down, but they were back in it and gave themselves a proper chance. It was class.
Do you know? I think, like, I genuinely don't think any of them ever lost belief. Like, strangely, after Thursday, I feel like there was still that they still believed they could win. And it was more about like I think Thursday was more about just look, enjoy it either way. Like it's an experience. There's players like there's how many people in the world that would love to play in one of these events, and like it's great to be there. And whether you win 5-0 or lose 5-0, you still enjoy it. Obviously, you want to win, and they're doing everything they can, but you have to just make the most of it.
That's brilliant. Like they were grateful to be there, so they were, no matter what, they were giving it their all. That's class.
I think so. Yeah, I'm putting words in their mouth there, but that was my kind of interpretation of the kind of players' attitudes, which was great. And it is a great bunch of players.
I think you had a pretty good perspective. Yeah.
I suppose team events is a rare situation for most of those players. Like, us growing up in Ireland, we GA and all sorts of things. We're all well used to team sports, but some of those might have just played golf. Like as an individual, that's probably a strange. Maybe they love it. Maybe they appreciate that more. The team sport.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's definitely the feeling I get from them because from talking to some of the captains, I think like when they were growing up, I know like Jeff and Ernie and a few of them guys would have played team sports. Like Ernie played rugby, I think, and Jeff played a bit of Aussie rules and all that. So they were kind of saying, yeah, like players of today probably do play pretty much just golf growing up. Like it's pretty rare for someone to be a rugby player at 16 and then become a pro golfer. So you're probably right. Actually, there probably is that bit of, it's a rare treat for them, and hopefully they all enjoy it.
Like we have kids camps and all that kind of stuff back in Ireland. Now I'm in London, but most of the kids that I come across, they play every single sport. Like they play rugby, they do swimming, they do running, they do fishing, everything, golf, tennis. everything. They play like 10 different sports, and then Saturday and Sunday is just rammed full of jumping from soccer to tennis to golf to swimming to whatever else, like rugby and soccer and everything else. So yeah, so maybe the next generation will be tons and tons of sports in them, team sports hopefully. But
I have another question about the international teams. Like, how do they gel so well together when there's so many different nationalities versus like just the US? Like the European team, the Ryder Cup seem to do well, but the international teams, that has to be, there are more cultures. Like Hideki doesn't speak a whole lot of English by the looks of it, and there seems to be like a real bond there. It's cool.
Yeah, I think it is like that's something I've kind of pondered. It's unbelievable the way they come together. Like even that when I mentioned that trip that we did a month before, like half the team kind of arrived sort of in the evening on the Sunday, and then I think there was 6 of them coming up from Tour Championship, so they came up. But from my point of view, it was noticeable because it wasn't just like a group of people filtering into a room. Like all the players made sure they like everybody talked to each other and they were all fist pumping, and it was a real team, and it was noticeable from somewhat the outside looking in. But I think it's the captains do a lot of work. It doesn't happen by accident. So like, I know Mike and all the kind of vice captains, and it goes back to Trevor last time. It goes back to Ernie in 2019. Like I wasn't involved before that, but I know from what I've heard, like, the Shield came in 2019 and there was definitely more emphasis on making it like a team. So we had there was a friend of Ernie's who is a Navy SEAL, and he came in and spoke during that trip. And he was part of like the origin of making the Shield and the kind of, bringing the team together as a bond. So it's not something that just kind of like happens by accident. There's meetups during the year. They play practice rounds together. They all get quite comfortable. And I think there's something about pulling towards the same goal. Like they all want it so much that, they all kind of get on board with it. But I genuinely think also they're just nice people. Like,
yeah,
I've dealt with a lot of golfers and people, and like the 12 that was there, and to be fair, all the other teams, like they just tend to be like sound.
Yeah.
That's probably the bottom line. So that helps.
Class. So outside of the President's Cup, Dylan, what's on the cards for you at the moment? I know you've obviously your own business started up. How is that looking, or what projects have you outside of the President's Cup and team golf?
Yeah, so we've a lot of stuff on. I suppose the business is really like the core focus was to improve golf stats. Like I think I kind of looked at the landscape of it about a year ago and sort of said there's a lot of room for improvement here. So like strokes gained, for example, there's huge flaws in that in terms of how it's calculated, what it misses. You need a very big sample to take any kind of real conclusions from it, whereas what we've built over the last year is we've incorporated like 100 features about shots to recalculate strokes gained, essentially to account for like wind and conditions and slopes and short-sightedness and 100 other things. But because I think stats sometimes lose their value. Like I was talking to a player earlier about working with them, and he said sometimes he looks at the PGA Tour stats and like it's just like it doesn't make sense to him because he knows there's so many flaws in it. Whereas if we can sort of fix that, then it goes from being like close to zero value to like actually having real value. So yeah, that's kind of the core of it. And then what that actually means in terms of like the real world is we're working with Upgame. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're basically a golf stats app, and we'd spent a while kind of thinking about building our own app, but it made more sense to partner with someone who's already out there. But yeah, we're essentially going to be like plugging into their system and bringing all that stuff that I just talked about, like the strokes gained X, we're calling it. So bringing that to life through them. So if you go in and you input a round in there, it'll account for all the conditions and the situation for each shot and give a sort of true reflection of your strokes gained, which will then obviously feed into your strategy, and you can use it for a whole load of other stuff. So that's a pretty big project that we're kind of getting going with now. It's very exciting, and it's good for me as well because like a lot of like I know like my game and like yourself and other people that I would have talked to, like there's a lot of people that are keen to get better, and people will ask me like, what's the best stats platform? And to be honest, historically, I've always kind of said like, some of them are good. There's never been one that I'm like, yeah, that actually does all the stuff that it should do. But I think together with Upgame, hopefully we should be able to create that actually does the things that that should be happening.
Unreal. So how does the strokes gained X work? So say like short-sightedness, for example. If you have a pin tucked right and you miss the green right, how much is it going to change your strokes gained if you have a 20-yard pitch to a short-sided pin? How does that work?
Yeah, so it depends a lot. Without getting into this isn't like a stats podcast necessarily, but there's things called interactions in statistics where like you could have like, let's say you're short-sighted and you're landing on a downslope. So both of those individually might add a fifth of the stroke, let's say, for example. But when you put them together, they might add three-fifths of the stroke, let's say. Okay. That's kind of like they don't necessarily add together. It's not like one plus the other plus the other. They can have this additional effect because it's not one independent of the other.
It's compounding to an extent, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So we what we've done is we've built a set of models that will, I suppose, account for that, but across all the features. So you'll have obviously the wind as well. So like if it's, when you add all this stuff in, it gets quite complicated. But like if you're short-sighted onto a downslope and it's downwind, it's very different to if it's into the wind. Or if you're short-sighted and you're into an upslope, that's very different again. So there's a lot of other things going on. Like temperature and air pressure are two things that probably surprise me how much of an impact they have on performance. But then
you're from the west of Ireland, Dylan. I thought the temperature one you'd know quite well from experience.
Air pressure.
Yeah. Well, air pressure. Yeah, but like even over in the States in particular, like I was chatting to a coach earlier, and he was saying like Torrey Pines. He said like in the morning, like there's holes where they're basically par fives, and then in the afternoon you're hitting like 7 irons into them.
It could be like misty and damp nearly in the mornings.
Yeah, it's huge. But it's good because like that kind of validates a lot of what we saw. I was surprised at how much of an effect it had, but he was less surprised, which is, I think, the less surprises you can give experienced people, the better, because it's probably a good sign. But yeah, it all interacts. So like essentially what happens is like we take as many features as we can about a shot and we feed it into the model, and then it does the kind of calculations with interactions and then gives it back. And there's like, this was something that I thought, I'll have this done in 3 months, and it's literally been like 13 months, and it's nearly there now.
Wow, that's class. Like, I'd imagine as you learn more and from doing it, like you probably will tailor it a little bit over time when you learn more as well. Is that how it works, or what's it look like for you dealing with Upgame in that sense? Yeah,
so we're actually we're starting like the start of next month with tour players basically, where we're going to do a 3-month project we're limiting it to 6, maybe 7, we'll see, but probably 6 players, where it's essentially going to be like an over and back process, because I've worked with a lot of like tour players in the past where I'll do a report for them, say on a course or on their performance, and I send it to them, and they're like, yeah, this is great, there's a couple of useful things in it, fine, and then it gets put on the shelf, and they might take something away from it, but the communication probably isn't what it could be. So what we're doing is we're basically spending the time between now and the end of January to talk to players, talk to their team, work out what we can do for them, but also like if there's anything we've missed in the data. So like, if they're looking at stuff and they see, like you need to incorporate X into this, we can take that back and we can add it in and update things. So it's probably the first time, bizarrely, in my kind of career in this area that I've done a 2-way process with players. It's nearly always been one way. But I think like even from that call that I said earlier, like it was with a player and their coach, and the coach is like really, really experienced and really knowledgeable, and the players as well. But I learned even from that call quite a bit, and I'm excited about the next 3 months about what we can learn on the communication side with players, but also like on the technical side and what else we can add in.
I always wondered, like, when you're working directly with a player like that, is it directly with the player, or are you having a conversation with their team? Because I'd imagine when they need to figure out what they have to work on in the game and like what they're actually good at versus not, the coach needs to understand that detail as well. So is the call typically when you're discussing that with the team, or is it just the player?
Depends on the player, depends on the type of communication, and that's kind of part of what we want to do as well. As like it varies from player to player. So Matt Fitz, I don't think I ever had a conversation direct with anyone, well, within reason. It was basically all through him, like everything. Okay. He wanted to know everything, and he could handle it. You know, he, like, if I told him he was terrible at something, he could get it and go away and work on it and get better.
No better man.
Whereas other players, and then other players would just be like, yeah, just give it to the caddy or give it to the coach. So it depends, but I like the player to be engaged anyway, and like understand what's going on, because the caddies come and go, coaches come and go, but like the players are, you know, they're pretty concrete. So,
and you want them to buy into what you're doing and what you're advising them to, that it'll be actionable.
Yeah. The guy that I talked to earlier, like his coach said that he was like, oh, I couldn't believe when he said he was having a call with a stats guy, because he was like, he normally thinks that's just bullshit. So he was like, I'm really excited to kind of get him on board with it. But I think to me that's important, because if his coach comes to me and says, I want to work with you guys and get the information on him, but he's not on board with it, then he doesn't really buy into it. He doesn't really, you know, it's probably almost reluctant, and then he's on the range going like, why am I doing this kind of thing? Whereas if everyone's on the same page, it's like any team or any kind of business. If you get everyone on the same page, it runs a little bit better. So, so yeah, I always kind of try and get the player as involved as possible.
There's that book, Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and it seems that like everyone buys in, they're working towards a common goal, like you were obviously in the President's Cup, and that there is the why in the first place. So that's it's pretty cool to hear you coming from that perspective with the players.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the starting point with most players is like, what's the goal here? Like, I talked to a player like 5 years ago. I was like, what's the goal? He said, I want to make as much money as possible. Like, that was it. That's fine. Like, you know, we can work with that. Goal.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that, you know, other players will say, I want to be world number one or whatever. But once you know what you're working with, then you can work around that.
How much does it tailor towards like their strategy to make money versus to win titles? That's an interesting. Are they more conservative and just top tens versus going for wins, or how does that work?
No, practically nobody. They're pretty much all wins. Like,
okay.
There's a few players who'll say like, I want to get inside the top 50, you know, for like Augusta, and like obviously now with the elevated events or signature events, they obviously want that, and that kind of forms part of it. But it's not about money. It's about like, they want to get into Augusta because they think they can win at Augusta. You know, it's like that's what it's all about for them. So yeah, like I'd say a handful of players I've ever talked to have even really mentioned money. It's more, you know, I can increase my chance of winning and increase my world ranking and, you know, all that. So yeah.
So I've been selfish here, thinking as a mini tour player, like strategy wise towards winning and getting onto tours like that. Is it like in general people are too conservative, maybe too aggressive in certain shots? What have you seen from working with players on their way up, like with strategy? How can they improve in that sense?
Do you mean mini tour players or amateurs?
Well, either or, just trying to get better.
Not the average Joe, like 18 handicap.
Yeah, they're probably two different things. I think I suppose like starting at the top level, like what always impresses me is like, it's not their good shots that are amazing, it's the bad shots that are really good. Like that's the thing where I played with Mike, I was saying, at Montreal, played 2 days with him, and he put the ball in the trees once, like, and he pitched out sideways, got up and down for par. I think he shot like 300 both days, which was probably fine for him, but like there was just no stage where we were looking for his ball or wondering if it was okay or anything like that. And that's like, Mike would say himself, like he's not really at kind of PJ Tour level. He's sort of towards the bottom end of it now, but like that's the key thing, and you see that a lot. So it's they're bad shots are really solid. Their putting
Okay.
is excellent, but I wouldn't say that like for an amateur, it's hard to compare like for like because they're on the same, well, essentially the same greens every week, same speeds. They've got really good prep done the course, so it's hard to hold as many 5 footers as tour players do in the conditions that we might play in. So
I think
in
my
terms of
dad plays.
strategy,
Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah, I was just
yeah,
going
in
to say
terms of
my dad
strategy,
plays Mullingar every day, so he probably knows the greens fairly well.
Yeah,
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 maybe
Eamon would.
Sorry,
he
go
probably
on.
holds a load of 5 footers.
Close his eyes and do it.
But yeah, no. So strategy wise, like I would say it actually varies a lot. Again, like I know I'm giving that answer to a lot of things here, but some
Mm.
players are very conservative. Like I know there was a couple of players that we used to do some stuff with that like just aimed at the middle of the green every time, and he was actually his dispersion was really good. It was just he was aiming in the wrong places. He never aimed at pins,
So his
and
dispersion was
then
really good that he was hitting them away from the flag, basically, because he wasn't aiming there.
well, yeah, like so he was aiming at the middle of greens, and then he was hitting it in a really tight dispersion around that. Whereas like if he should have just aimed like 15 feet closer to the flag. So
Okay.
you get that sometimes, but I'd say probably most players, it's not necessarily they're too aggressive. They just don't put enough thought into it. So like when you look at like tour caddies and even tour players to a point, like they'll be able to look at a hole almost instantly and say like, that's probably a 3 wood hole because if you hit the driver here, you're going to be on the downslope and you're going to be awkward. But if the pin is back right, then maybe it's a driver and you get it up there, whatever. So like, but that's the level of thought, and like they'll have looked at every bunker on the course. They'll have looked like fairway bunkers and around the green, and they'll know most of the slopes around there. So that's the level of thought that goes into it. And then once you know everything or as much as you can do about it, then it's normally pretty easy to make the right decision. Particularly with like clubs off the tee. So well, it's not like a simple answer, but
Hmm.
you want to be like the distance thing. Obviously, has kind of blown up the last I don't know 5 years or whatever. I would say distance it's obviously hugely valuable, but I think I was saying this to you before, Liam, that like it's not linearly distributed through a round. So like if you hit it 30 past the field, you don't gain like zero point 0.2 strokes per drive. You gain like zero point 0.4 on some and you gain like zero point zero 0.05 on others. So if you can get good at identifying the ones where you can gain the zero point 0.4 by adding the distance, but you're taking less risk, if it's a fairly open hole or whatever, like say if you've got a long par 5 that's quite wide, and you can get up there and rip a driver as hard as you can, that's beneficial to you. Whereas like other holes where it's kind of shorter and tighter, if you leave yourself 100 yards versus 60 yards, it's actually, and this is kind of contradicting what a lot of people say these days, there's definitely scenarios where that's better. Like even I would have probably said it a few years ago where closer is always better. It's not always, like, especially if you're playing like fast, firm courses,
To
different pins,
front
different
pin, say,
conditions.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there are times, but not that common, but there are definitely times where, prioritizing hitting the fairway is quite important.
So say with up game now, are you able to track that stuff? So say like, I think, was it up game that you can track where you're aimed and then your dispersion based on that? So that can
Yeah.
basically give you feedback on your strategy, because it's very hard. Like I use Golf Stats Coach, it's pretty good, but I don't know on every shot when I look back at the stats where I was aimed versus where it finished. I think that's pretty important, and like being able to get feedback on my strategy would be hugely influential to like learning from it, taking it forward.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like, I'll give you an example of part of the reason we actually wanted to work with Upgame is that they give us all that data. Like, it's really useful to be able to say, okay, he was aiming here and he actually hit it here. But a good example of that is I was playing in the Castleknock Scratch Cup this year, and I was teeing off on the par three, cold morning, like 8 o'clock tee off, hitting a 4 iron to a pin like 220, a load of water up the right side, and I was just like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I don't fancy that.
Yeah.
So I went on to the Upgame app and like got my dispersion with a 4 iron, and basically overlaid it onto the hole. And if I remember it right, there's a bunker at the back of the green, and I was like, if I aim at the right edge of that bunker, my dispersion's like 95% not to go on the water. So I just stood up there, aimed there, committed to it, and it was like, great. I put on the green like both rounds, and
Unreal. You're gaining a lot of strokes there.
yeah, but it was more about like, they were obviously good shots, but it was more about the commitment. And then like the next hole actually as well, interestingly, the par four, and I hate when people do this on podcasts where they talk about holes in specific courses that I don't know. But anyway, the fourth hole
But
is
it's a
like
situation. You're giving us context, so which is important. So
yeah. So the next one is it's a relatively tight par four, but again, I got up there, I overlaid my dispersion on the hole, and I was actually like, if I get my target right here, it's actually not that tight at all if I hit driver. So yeah, hit driver up there, but didn't even. I wasn't standing up there going, oh, like, I need to be straight here. I need to be careful, or I don't want to go in those bushes. Like I was, pick a target, commit to it, swing at it, and trust that like my dispersion is within the kind of boundary here.
yeah,
So that's the type of thing that to me is just so useful because I didn't I didn't give those a second thought when I was on the course. I knew what I was doing, just went and did it, and I think I played the two holes in like 1 under for the 2 rounds, which
brilliant.
yeah, I was definitely gaining a good bit there. I played the rest in like 10 over or something, but
It wasn't strategy. That might have been execution a little bit. But the other thing
definitely.
I'd imagine it'd be interesting to track is that your dispersion in a committed tee shot versus an uncommitted tee shot are so different. Do you know, like if you're doubting a shot up there, oh, just don't hit it left and you wing it right. That's a different thing than knowing that if you hit your proper drive here, you have room and you typically do hit it there. That's it. It's a completely different mindset, and that's I'll be making the switch, Dylan. You've sold me. Do you get
Sale
commission?
number one. Yeah, I need to talk to them about that, I think, yeah.
Brilliant.
Another logo on the
Um,
top, Lou.
Yeah, exactly. What's that? Yeah. So I suppose, like, what else is on the cards for you now? Is it working hard on this, or are you working with any players directly, or what's happening on the tour side of it?
Yeah, we're starting that project now, starting next month. So we should have 6 players. I won't name them just yet because we're
Okay.
getting contracts and stuff finalized. Because we hadn't really, we did a little bit with like tour players and stuff over this year, but like I said, I kind of wanted to maybe take a step back and go, look, what's the best way of doing this? And like, how can we actually add? Because it makes it easy for everyone. Because like we used to do these big long reports, and a player might read like 25% of it. So we're wasting time, they're wasting time. Whereas like this might actually reduce the amount of work we have to do and make it better for them. So,
Brilliant.
so yeah, like they'll all be, it's probably going to be 6 PGA Tour players, I'd say. I think it's looking like they're all going to be top 50 or inside it. So, it should be good. And we're actually kind of focusing more on the right type of people, like the right personalities that we can talk to them and say like, what did you think of this, and get kind of honest feedback. The more intelligent ones, to be honest. So no offense to any of the other ones, but
Yeah.
yeah. So there's that, and then we've got like we've got a couple of projects kind of on the betting side of things as well that we're sort of exploring at the minute, where because obviously the models have applications across different things, so we'll see how they play out. But yeah, we're very busy at the minute, which is always good. Not
That's
good for the
unreal.
golf
Even
game, but
as the you need to come out, and we'll get a few games over the winter when you do get some time. But it's interesting that like this is kind of golf's off season to an extent. It's died down, and you're as busy as ever, obviously, with all of this stuff. I suppose,
it
Dylan,
picks up
we
for
don't want
players.
to
Yeah.
we don't want to take a whole lot more of your time. You've given us some great info here, and obviously it's exciting with what you're doing. Gary, I don't know if you have any more questions, or otherwise I'm happy enough to log
just
off here.
maybe one thing. I think you mentioned it before. Just the importance of each club in the bag and which one. Say for the average player that'll be listening, like how important is the driver versus the putter versus the wedge game versus the irons? Is the driver a standout as much most people think, or putting is maybe 40% of the game for a lot of players? And where do you think the golden nugget for most players would be statistically? Like, I think you mentioned the driver was quite strong.
Yeah. Like I mean, if you were going to be good in one area, you probably wanted to be driving. there's a lot of reasons for it. One of the main ones is like it gives you a platform. So like your driving is the least variable area of golf. So like if you're a player, like again to use a tour example, if you gain a stroke per round driving, you're going to gain probably between half stroke and a stroke and a half nearly every round, or the majority of them. Whereas like putting is kind of streaky, which is good in a sense because it helps you win tournaments and things like that. But if you want to be a solid like low handicap player, driving I would say is probably number one. Beyond that, it varies depending on the courses you play. Like a good driver is going to be good in any course, but if you're a tour player, they generally have a lot of shots between 100 and 200 yards. They don't have a lot inside 100, they have less outside 200. It's like if you can be really good at that kind of even 120 to 175, that kind of range, they're going to be pretty good. But for me, depending on the course I play, like Carrick Shannon there is a little bit shorter, but it's tricky. Like there's a lot of kind of tough wedge shots, but I need to be good at wedges, like full wedges pretty much. So again, it probably comes back to the thing I said earlier about like having to think about the courses you're playing. Yeah. And like you can work it out pretty quickly, when you think through courses, you're like, oh yeah, I actually have 7 wedge shots in that course versus 4 or 2 irons or something like that. So then obviously you need to work on your wedges. So yeah, it depends on the course you're playing, but definitely driving number one. Putting has to be up to a certain standard. Like that's been something I've kind of worked on the last couple of years and it's going the right direction, but it definitely has to be good or else you're going to struggle to kind of get anywhere fast. If I was sort of to slack on practice in an area, it'd probably be the short game, like chipping. Generally that's kind of something you can get away with, because if your long game's good and you're hitting 12 or 13 greens, the amount of work it would take to turn 2 up and downs into 3 up and downs, you can put that elsewhere and be more effective. So not saying don't practice your short game, but it's definitely the least important area.
Yeah, just like say Tiger at his best in 2001, around that, like was there any number that was insane during that time, or like didn't he go so many holes without a 3-putt, like a crazy number?
Yeah, it was 800 or something. No, it was over 1,000. Like, yeah, it was something crazy. I mean, he was crazy across the board. I think his iron play was pretty outrageous, but like his putting as well. It was like Scotty Scheffler. I think last year when he was at his best last year, he was like his whole game apart from his putting was as good as Tiger in his peak. But I think Tiger in his peak was like putting the number one putter on tour with Scheffler's the rest of his game. That was kind of Tiger in his peak. So it was,
no one had a chance. They already didn't have a chance against Scotty. Never mind Tiger.
Yeah.
So could you statistically tell us who was the best player ever to play golf? Was it Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods, or was it neither?
I actually no, I don't have a statistical answer for that because the data doesn't go back to Nicklaus' time, unfortunately. Yeah. There might be. I mean, if we had good detailed data, and at some point somebody might put it together, but you could definitely make a comparison. Because we can compare Tiger now to Scheffler. I think Scheffler got within. I think he might have got within a stroke of him, a stroke around. Which, yeah. So you can do that kind of comparison. Now, obviously, like times change and conditions and all that. But
changes.
Yeah, there's pretty good ways of accounting for kind of variability and things like that, but it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So if I was making a call on it, I'd probably say Tiger based on talking to other people, but maybe that's a generational thing.
Well, I think what is it, 15 majors? Scotty still has a long way to do, and that longevity as well. Like Scotty's done it for like probably nearly 2 seasons now, but like Tiger did it for so long. So it's kind of that's equally impressive.
Cut short.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly is, yeah.
Well, Dylan, it's been great chatting to you. We'll hopefully maybe we'll do another recap this time next year or something. But it'll be exciting to see what's happening with Upgame and your new project. So I'm converted, so I'm looking forward to signing up.
Great. Thanks a million for having me, lad.